So interview two, part two. So this is for real estate first-time buyers. And what I did, I asked the audience of Startups Innovation, what are the questions you guys have about real estate? What's avoiding you from going from the idea of wanting maybe to buy a house one day and actually buying a house? And what people told me is, well, it's quite complicated. We don't understand what always the agents are saying. We don't know if the agents, are, not telling us everything. So we want to be empowered. We want to better understand how it works so we can make a decision and sort of, own the discussion a little bit with the agents, as opposed to the agents knows everything and the buyer kind of knows, nothing, which then makes the buying decision difficult. So first, maybe why buy a home? Let's start with the really basic, in terms maybe of building wealth, someone who wants to build wealth. So meaning, money equals freedom equals happiness, right? So to help someone achieve freedom, achieve happiness, in what sense buying a home helps from your perspective?
So I would say, first of all, for, let's just say, a first-time home buyer, considering whether buying something or renting, the basic reasons for buying is, first of all, it's a tax write-off. So for example, I'm going to make very low and simple numbers, but if you were paying $1,000 a month in rent, $1,000 a month in a mortgage payment, through the incentives through the federal government, you would save about $4,000 a year on buying on your mortgage versus your rent. So really, $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year payment to rent would be the same as paying $8,000 a year towards something you own. So number one, it's just tax savings. Secondly, for the most part, historic real estate value increases. That's not to say that if you buy today that it's definitely going to be worth more in 2 years, be worth less in 2 years. But historically, over time, if you hold it long enough, there is not an infinite amount of. So because that there is not an infinite amount of real estate and land available, eventually everything appreciates. So by buying rather than renting, you have something that you could sell down the road and hopefully make some money on, thing that you actually own. Whereas by renting, you really have nothing that you can sell down the road. That's for buying for a first-time home buyer. As far as an investor, if you research the wealthiest people in the world, it is always somebody that has created income that is not tied to the number of hours that they have available to work in a day. So any of us have jobs and stuff, like our income is tied to the number of hours in a day, which means that there's only so much wealth we can create. If you can create other streams of income where you have money coming in, even if you're sitting at a beach or traveling the world, that's where wealth is limitless. One of the ways that people do that is through real estate. So properties that create rental income, so that over time, even if you have to leverage it in the beginning, because that's where people say, oh, you don't make that much money because you have a mortgage, etc. But over time, eventually mortgages get paid off, and over time you create something where you have income coming in all day long, no matter where you're sitting in the world. So if you want to be a billionaire, an easy way to get there is to start buying real estate.
Great. So next question, what is the preferred size for first purchase? So I'm hearing, so this is what I'm hearing. So millennials have the wrong expectations and they want, to buy big mansions, or they want the perfect house for the first time house they buy. Is that a good strategy or no? Or is it better to buy maybe a smaller house you can pay off quick? What's your thoughts on this?
Couple of things I will say in general. I know it sounds cliche, but it's very true. Always buy the worst house in the best neighborhood, because at least you're buying something that has some equity built in. I came from mortgages long before I was in real estate, and the biggest piece of advice I have for a first-time home buyer to consider a multifamily home. The reason for that is when you are a first-time home buyer, there are a lot of mortgage programs that are afforded to you that are not afforded to people buying second, third, and fourth properties. One of the things that a first-time home buyer that you won't get ever again once you've owned is a low down payment mortgage. So what's cool is buy a two-family. Now, normally, this is what normally happens. When somebody decides to buy a house, they buy a single-family home. And then after they've bought a single-family home, that they want to own a multifamily because now they want to start building the real estate portfolio. Well, now that they've already first-time buyer status, so the next property they're going to buy is going to require a large down payment, much larger than a first-time buyer. So usually 8% down payment if they want to go buy a 2, 3, or 4 family. The way around that is for first-time buyer to buy their multifamily as their first property. That way they can get their first-time homebuyer status and low mortgage on that multifamily. And then down the road, if they want to go buy another property like a single family, they can do that. What's interesting is the timing matters. So a first-time homebuyer could basically buy a low down payment, buy 2 to 4 family with a low down payment mortgage using FHA financing, for example, and then could say 3 years later another single family home and do a 5% down payment. But what they cannot do, what the mortgage rules do not for, is that you buy a single family, put 3 to 5% down, and then go buy a multifamily. Because now that multifamily, because you already own the single family, believe that that multifamily is an investment property. So they're requiring a larger down payment. So if you structure it properly, buy your multifamily first, down payment, then you can go buy another single family a year or 2 years later and get another low down payment on that single family.
Great.
That would be my
That would be the strategy you recommend.
Yeah, and it transitions people, like it gets them used to. There's a lot to be said for owning a multifamily as your first property, because yeah, your mortgage payment could be $5,000 a month, but if you have $2,500 coming in from the next door tenant, you get down to $2,500 a month, and it's usually cheaper than what you would get for rent if it's close to the city, and much cheaper than what you would end up paying if you were to buy a single family house.
Yep. So options, this question came up there, options for young people with student loans or older people. How easy or difficult is it to borrow money and invest in real estate when you're just out of university, still the student loans, or you're on the older side of life, in your 50s, 60s, 70s, is it possible to borrow money by real estate?
Absolutely. I bought my first house when I was 20. So absolutely. And as being older, if anything, by being older, the good thing is that you have like a job history behind you. So sometimes it's easier. The downside is that it really comes down to credit. So age is almost never going to even play into it. It comes down to your income, your credit, and your down payment. Those are the three things that matter despite age. The good thing so if you're coming out of college and you decide that you want to buy your first property, the cool thing is that most of the mortgage programs take into consideration that you would not have a 2-year work history. So if you're my age, 44 years old, and I want for a mortgage, I have to show a 2-year job history because I didn't recently finish school. Whereas if I just graduated school and I only had a job history, they would use that income right away to qualify. The bad thing is those student loans do absolutely hurt you in qualifying for it. It lowers the amount that you will qualify for based on whatever your monthly debt is for those student loans. But it's good and what you should factor those in, just like if you have a car payment or student loans or credit card debt, you want to make sure that you can afford the mortgage. No matter what they approve you for, you want to make sure you feel comfortable with what the mortgage payment will be. And I'd say that when it comes to buying a house, not only do you have to have a very strong real estate agent, but you have to make sure that you're dealing with a strong, reputable mortgage person who's going to tell you all of the different options. I'll say in the United States, we also have a program for older, like senior citizens. Usually it's a reverse mortgage product. And basically it's for people that already have owned their home for many years and have lots of equity. Typically they have zero or low mortgage, that basically they can turn their house into income through a reverse mortgage so that they get a check every month. They're getting a check every month, but they accumulate a loan on their property. So it can turn into like an income stream as well.
So there are opportunities. People should not be blocked or stop themselves from at least meeting with the banker, meeting with the real estate agents. There are solutions that they should be investigating, basically.
Yeah, and I'd say even if you get a roadblock, always go. I'd interview more than one, because there's so many different mortgage companies that offer so many different products that it's possible that somebody sits down and asks for their options, and that loan originator says there are no options, and when in reality there might be options available in another mortgage company or bank. So even if you sit with somebody and they tell you something that isn't great or that there are no options, do not stop there researching and sitting with other people, because almost always there's other opportunities available.
You're right. And then what about for low income earners? So is buying a home available to all budgets?
I say absolutely available to all budgets. First of all, programs out there for low or moderate income, but in many of the cities, like for example, Boston, and cities on the like Lowell, Massachusetts, for example, there are programs available that offer down payment assistance. So if you fall on income, they are programs where you take classes on how to buy real estate, and then you potentially have access to grant money for down payment. So sometimes being a low or moderate income household, it helps you because you qualify for monies for your down payment. In addition to that, I'll also say I sit on the board of Habitat for Humanity, and for Humanity is an organization that provides homeownership opportunities to low-income families. So even beyond traditional mortgages and traditional estate, there are nonprofit organizations, Habitat Humanity, which is probably one of the biggest in the United States, houses all throughout Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and the properties are priced below market value. They provide zero mortgages. The buyers have to go through a qualification process, and they also have to put in sweat equity. So they're building the property. But I'd say yes, no matter what, there's almost always an option available.
Yep, and then One story I have from someone I know who bought a condo in a not so good neighborhood of London, like 30
Mm-hmm.
years ago. Well, London boomed. It's a great city. It's the most expensive city now in the world, or one of the most expensive city to live in. And that condo that he paid, 50,000 pounds back then is now worth, 300,000 pounds or even more, several years later. So there's also opportunities, and we see the same thing happening in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, where buying actually a house, I would imagine, in a low income area on a 30-year
Mm-hmm.
can yield even more than, for those low income earners than, just renting. And, it can be a great opportunity. And we see it in Boston too, right? There's some neighborhoods that are developing like,
Yeah,
immensely. So, and the
absolutely.
biotech, biopharma, or, lots of, immigrants, high paid immigrants that comes in, all this,
Mm-hmm.
puts the rent up, the housing market up, and then it's an opportunity, for people to buy housing in their, neighborhoods, basically, I'm guessing.
Right.
So, so what's the typical process to buy a house? So what's the steps?
So I would say first step is meeting with either an agent or a mortgage person. No matter what, you're going to have to talk to a mortgage professional right from the get-go. If you have not spoken to a mortgage person yet and you go to a real estate agent first, one of the first things they'll do is put you in touch with one or two or a handful of mortgage people for you to reach out to, because really you want to make sure that money to put down. And this is all stuff that a mortgage person is going to vet for you, but they'll come up with, based on your income and your liabilities and your credit, they're going to come up with a number of what you qualify for. Then you want to make sure that you feel comfortable payment based on what you qualify for. So they might tell you you can afford $4,000 a month, and you say, whoa, I'd have no money left on a monthly basis if I had a $4,000 a month payment. So then you'd say, okay, what I feel comfortable with is a $3,000 a month payment. And then you tell your mortgage person, figure out what price I should be looking at for a $3,000 a month payment. So definitely mortgage person, because they're also going to tell you how much money out of pocket, how much for a down payment, closing costs, taxes, insurance, stuff like that. So mortgage piece is a big piece of it. Once the mortgage piece is done, and typically they'll have you get pre-approved. So they're going to want tax returns, banks, they're going to run your credit. They're going to start doing all the due diligence and making sure you qualify. Once that's all done, then you can start for a piece of real estate with a real estate agent.
And so do layer partners, for instance, work with mortgage companies where the buyer just comes to you guys and then you guys connect the buyer with a mortgage company and take care of all the, submitting the paperwork and seeing how much they can apply for? Or it's
Yes. So we
disconnected?
leave it up. Yes, we have our own, like we have a bunch of mortgage companies that we feel comfortable working with, because there are definitely mortgage companies out there that when a real estate agent hears that you're working with one of those mortgage companies, they're like, uh-oh, that pre-approval is not even worth the paper it's written on. So I'll say that almost every great agent, every great real estate agent, not almost, every great real estate agent has a team. They already know the people that they want to work with in a marketplace as far as mortgage people, and they'll put you in touch. In fact, I think one of the important roles a real estate agent person does is that they create this team for you. So a mortgage person, an attorney who you'll need to get involved eventually, because you really want to be super well educated on the process. especially like this year, we saw a record number of bidding wars on properties. And that means buyers are coming in, first-time buyers often, and paying way more than the asking price on a property. So a house might be listed at 100 and it might sell for 575. There's lots of ramifications that go with that. So first of all, the house has to appraise with the mortgage. It typically requires a large down payment. But most importantly, when it comes to a bidding war, most sellers will not accept an offer. There's a pre-approval from the person putting the offer in. So definitely super important to have a strong team.
Okay, great. So buying in the city or outside the city for first-time buyer?
It goes both ways. So we do a lot of work right in the city of Boston as well. We do a ton of work in suburbs. So this is what I'll say is buying within the city is extremely expensive. So potentially you're going to come up with $1 million plus to buy a condo in the city. Sometimes you can find deals. I mean, we recently had a north end of Boston, and it was a small studio around 500,000. But for the most part, you're getting up close to $1 million just for a condo in the city. The upside to that is that if you work in the city, you have live, work, play in the city. Everything is one spot. You barely have to drive to get anywhere. We do a ton of business outside the city in the suburbs. The reason is the further you get away from the city, the lower the prices go. So oftentimes first-time homebuyers will elect moves, for example, 30 minutes outside the city where they can get way more for their money. They get a yard, get strong schools, train service to the city, things like that. So I'd say it really comes down to the of the particular buyer. But the big reason people don't buy in the city is that the prices, they just want more money. And also a lot of people just prefer like more suburban living, like a house with their picket fence neighbors rather than like a condo. The people that want to be in the city, it's more because they want to live, work, they want every place. They don't want to have to drive for anything.
Yep. So it's lifestyle, basically, lifestyle choice.
Yeah, correct.
So how do you avoid making a bad investment?
Making a what?
A bad investment. So what would you say, to a friend, first-time buyer, hey, you need to be careful of these things?
Okay, this is a great example. I recently had a friend that was looking to buy in Boston, and I would not let him put an offer in on a particular condo because I basically showed him statistics to think that the value of that condo is going to be supported 3 or 5 years down the road. I think, first of all, you need a very strong real estate agent who's going to get to the bottom of who you are and what your future plans are. Now, if my friend who wanted to make this bad investment, in my opinion, in the city, going to live in the city for the next 10 or 20 years of his life, then I would have said, you know what, it's priced high. Eventually, if the market's down, it'll recoup over the years. So over the next 10 to 20 years, that condo is a great investment. But if you're looking to put a low down payment, and this is a property that you want to live in for the next 18 months to 2 years, I showed a market analysis going back. Basically, it was the most expensive property in this complex and never gone as much as they were asking for this unit. And I felt like he would not recoup his value 2 years into it. So I think a real estate agent would ask you all kinds of questions about where you are and how long you're going to stay there. They would also do a market analysis. So a market analysis is done for a seller. So if somebody wants to sell their house, a real estate agent goes in, pulls all the comparable properties that have listed and sold in the general to show them what range their house is in. A great buyer agent will do that on-side transaction. So when they're working with a buyer who wants to put in an offer on a property, they're going to say, all right, before we put in an offer, let's do a market and see what the property is worth, so that it limits the number of times somebody makes a bad investment. Other than that, it's really educating the consumer about how to shop, like what else to look for. So we encourage them, we give them websites, research the schools and the towns, and contacting the local police department to see if there are registered sex offenders in the area. So it really comes down to helping the buyer, educating the buyer on what to look for. You never know. I mean, I've invested in a lot of real estate in my lifetime, and almost always it appreciates in value. But I've had situations where I've sold properties and they've gone down a little bit in value as well. So what you can do to protect yourself as a potential buyer of an investment is do lots of research up front, so that you feel comfortable that when you're ready to sell it down the road, that it's appreciated in value, not depreciated.
Great, thank you. So how do you actually calculate the investment cost and potential return over time? And
Correct.
do you include in there, the amount you currently lease? So because you don't need to lease an apartment once you buy a house. So how do you calculate the net, gain over time of a real estate investment?
Yeah, so I'd say it's a bunch of different things. I'd say typically a first-time home buyer is not doing complicated calculations like that. They're more looking at, what is the mortgage payment that I'm paying? What would I pay for rent if I'm in the same vicinity? How much tax savings will I have by owning rather than renting? And then potentially roughly what I think the appreciation in value will be. Because right off the bat, if you're just buying to live in it, I mean, no matter what, for most people have a housing expense one way or another. So it's super easy in most instances to justify that if I have a down payment, especially a first-time home buyer, if I have a low down payment, say I can come up with 3 to 5%, and I can create a payment that's equal to, sometimes less than, a rent payment, it's easy to justify. And then as far as, we also look at what the person could rent the property for down the road. So always trying to help our people consider their worst case scenario. What happens if a family member loses a job, and can you still afford the payment? And if you did lose a job and had to move into your mom's, how much could you rent the property for? So it might even be a single family, but even single families potentially rent out when somebody has to move out because they can't afford a mortgage payment.
Yep, so that's actually a good point, and I'm going to skip a few questions ahead there, giving you some real life millennial scenarios. So this is real people. I won't say any names, but I promised them that I would put those stories in there. So you have the millennial couple. So for them, they want to live, free for now, enjoy the lifestyle of the city, wine and dine and have fun and be able to travel. And they don't know yet if they're going to live in Boston or in another city. And there's a lot of unknown, and all those unknowns makes them believe that they need to rent a house or rent a condo in this case. Is that a good approach? Or even if there's uncertainty on the long term, is it okay to buy, a house, even if a condo, even if you might be moving in 5 years down the line?
I think 5 years is a long time. I would say if you look historically, over 5 to 10 years, it'll appreciate. I would say if they're not sure what they're going to do over the next 2 years, then I would just wait it out. why I wouldn't rush. I think there's uncertainty as to whether housing will continue to appreciate over the next couple of years. So it might dip some over the next 5 to 10. Most likely, even if it dips, it would begin to recover by then. So I'd also say I wouldn't rush. So maybe not necessarily buy $1 million condo right now, but look into some up and coming areas. Like you mentioned, there's neighborhoods and cities all around that are like up and coming. For example, in East Boston, Rochester areas, those areas are increasing by the day. So it's something that they're not sure about long term. Maybe buy something in like a community like that where more likely the property will appreciate over time, that they can sell it or continue to rent it. There are a lot of people that, for example, get relocated out of Boston to a totally different city, and they just rent out the property and continue to keep it so that it just keeps appreciating every year.
Exactly, and I think, something people don't get with real estate is, you need to be a bit creative, a bit of an entrepreneur also, and there's always a way to resolve a potential issue, right? A loss of a job, you need to relocate, and I know old or the prior generation, would be no question whatsoever, right? Renting would be out of question. It's like unless really, like you said, it's 2 years uncertainty. I don't know what I'm going to do for 2 years. But then most people, past generation, would buy right away, and then if they move, they put a lessee in there, or they sell it. And the new generations are more, they don't know what tomorrow is made of, and then they let it slip, and then 15 years has passed and it slips. And there's also another. So here's another story. So it's a young, hardworking, ambitious expat. So he just got hired by an amazing company, well paid in Munich. So he went to Munich, and for him it's YOLO. You only live once, and I'm going to Munich, and I'm going to take a rent in the city center, expensive, wine and dine again, the millennials. So, and I told him, well, think about it. Maybe you go there and look maybe to buy a property, right? Buy a little property, and don't necessarily spend all your money in your first year. But there's the same happening in Boston, right? There's a lot of immigrants coming from hired by the big tech companies from around the world, and same stuff. They arrive, the first thing they do, they rent. We see all those leased building. When you arrive in Boston at the bridge, it's lifestyle, it's $5,000 a month, condos. Is that really the right way, to invest hard-earned money, right? And as opposed to acquiring property in the city. I told my friend of Munich, it's because he's saying, well, I'm in Munich now. Next I might be in Paris. Next I might be in Madrid. I said, why don't you buy something in Munich, small, buy something in Paris, small, buy something in Madrid, small. If you're making a lot of money for the company you're working for, and then you become you start to acquire assets. But for millennials, it's not the mindset. But what's your thoughts on this? For the two millennial stories, so the couple from Boston, 10 years together, but haven't yet invested or made the decision to invest, and then the young, hardworking, mobile expat that's traveling around the world.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. I agree with you. I always say, like, you can either pay your own mortgage or pay somebody else's. So why would you want to pay somebody else's, which is in essence what you're doing if you're renting something.
Yep. So does Lear Real Estate do leasing and selling, or it's just selling?
So we absolutely do both, leasing or majority of the business is buying and selling real estate, but absolutely we have a lot of people like your friends that say, I'm going to lease for a year. One of the big reasons people will lease as well is they're not sure if they will like the area. So if you're moving to, like, for example, summer Boston and you're not sure that you're going to love that area, a lot of people will do like a 6 or 12-month lease. That way they can get used to the area, decide if they that, and then once they've been there for a while, that's when they'll decide to buy.
Got it. So thanks. That was the two stories here. So I interviewed Tom McElroy. So Tom McElroy is a primitive skill and survival expert. He's been living in the jungles around the world for like 18 years. He taught Navy SEALs how to survive in the jungle and 15,000 students around the world. He said to survive in the live jungle, the 5 rules is number 1, or no, it's not 5 actually, but the few rules to survive is number 1, build your shelter. So he was, and then we kind of agreed that, you know, to survive, you have to build a shelter. And then I asked him, what about in real life? And he said, well, in real life, I do think it's the same. You know, you have to acquire your shelter first, because if you have your shelter, you know, nothing really bad can happen to you, as opposed to when you don't have, you know. So
yes.
So for millennials listening, you know, real estate, consider it. It's a good investment, and you know, go talk to the real estate agents of Lear Partners. They're amazing. They understand millennials. They're building an amazing brand too, and you know, they have the best real estate agents in the area. So we talked about the mortgage process, how it works. So basically, what you explained, people just, you know, submit an application. There's many mortgage brokers out there. What do you think about Lending Club? Is Lending Club a good alternative?
I'm not super familiar with it. Definitely don't see it come through a lot. Most of the people that are getting mortgages are they're getting traditional financing. The good thing about traditional financing is because of FHA and Fannie Mae, you can get fairly low down payments. So many of our going through are going for that type of traditional financing or state funded mortgages. I don't know Lending Club specifically, but we do a handful of private investors who are great. The private investor programs are great for people that want to buy invest property and either don't have tax returns that support their income, which is usual for entrepreneurs, meaning they have income coming in, but it's sporadic and their taxes don't reflect all of it. Or an investor that does not have a large down payment. Typically, if you're going for regular financing at a regular mortgage company or bank, if you're buying an investment property, you need a large down payment, typically 20%. If somebody were to come to me today and say, I want to buy an investment property, but I don't have 20% to put down, I would say there are definitely options available through private investors who basically are people and money. They're private people that lend their money for projects like that, but you'll definitely pay a higher interest for it. I've used them in the past when, like, for example, when I transitioned my real estate brand, because of the transition in companies, I could not get financing for a while. So I used private lenders so that I wouldn't have to stop buying real estate because I didn't meet qualifications. When you're working with a private investor, the good thing is you don't have to provide as much documentation. Typically, you don't have to give all the tax returns and bans and stuff like that. The downside to working with private investors is typically your interest rate is much higher than what you would pay on the market. And there's prepayment penalties. So meaning when somebody comes and buys a property and flips it 3 months later, so they penalize you by charging you an extra fee by flipping it. But there are options available. That's why I said at the beginning, when it comes to buying or selling, if somebody discourages you, don't assume the final answer. There are a million other potential ways to buy, and one of the ways to do that is through private investors.
And so where do you find those private investors? Is that on your site, or what's the best, you know, I can imagine from a buyer standpoint, and I know for a fact actually it's difficult to find, you know, the broker that's going to give you the good mortgage, and there's so many. Isn't there a place where you can submit just one application and, you know, you get proposals from the different areas, like to make it easy, you know, for millennials, right? They want easy stuff.
Yes. I don't know if anything exists like that for private investors. I know, for example, 4 or 5 of them, and typically they work off of word of mouth and referrals from strong real estate agents. So I'd say most real estate agents who've been in the business for a while have their who are the private investors who they'll refer to. But most of the private investor companies, you don't see them out advertising, because they want, basically, they know the real estate agents they like working with,
Yep.
and they know that if a customer comes through that real estate agent, that it's probably well vetted, good investment for them as a mortgage investor in a property.
Okay, so then we talked earlier, you know, you said, you know, if someone loses his job, or, you know, uncertainty in life, and people have a lot of fear about this, what are the types of insurances that actually protects the buyer when buying a house, and that can help in, you know, down times? Because it happens in life, right? Nothing is
Yes.
certain. So what are the types of insurances, and, you know, how can we reassure a little bit the buyer on that front?
So I'd say a couple of different things. I believe are mortgage insurances of some sort that you can buy. First of all, typical mortgage insurance that you're forced to pay. The typical mortgage insurance you're forced to pay does not protect you. It protects the bank. So you have, if you're putting a low down payment, less than 20% down your mortgage insurance, that is forced insurance. It does not protect the buyer. It protects the bank. If they have to foreclose on you, they get some of their money back. Our insurance is out there. I don't know the pricing on it. It's unusual to see them. What most people do is a life insurance policy. So if something happens to one of the primary wage earners of the house, somebody dies, for example, that there's a policy in place that will pay off, or at least give a great deal of money to help fund the mortgage. I'd say that is probably the big piece. The other piece is we've lived through, like, for example, 7 years ago, a whole new era of short sales. So I have seen what happened to your house in 3 years and you're upside down. In other words, say 3 years from now, you owe $500,000, but your house is worth $400,000. Most of the banks shaded short sales, meaning that they accept a lower payoff. Even though you've agreed to pay $500,000, they take, for example, $400,000 because it's cheaper for them to actually foreclose on the property. So it's just something to keep in mind. I don't encourage people, like, you want to make a wise investment, but there's always a way out. So if you need to sell down the road and you're upside down, you can just do a negotiated short sale on the property.
Thanks. So can you put a lessee in your first home and then buy a new home in a new place? And what does it take to do this? You know, you buy your first home and you put immediately a lessee in to pay the mortgage.
Yep.
You go back to the bank and say, now I need a home for me. You know, and
So
you buy 2 homes, basically, one which is more an investment where you put a lessee in, and then one with your own homes. So
you can definitely do that. The first home will be a low down payment because it's owner occupied. Home is going to be a large down payment. So you might be able to do your first home at 3 to 5% down, and then you can start buying other properties. I'm going to plug in my computer because it's about to die. But then you can buy other properties at usually 20%. That's why I was saying for a multifamily, you're better off doing your multifamily first, because you could buy the multifamily at 3 to 5% down, which is expensive than a single family. And then like wait a year, and then you could go buy another owner occupied house with a low down pay, 5% down. All right, hold on. I'm going to just plug in.
Yes.
Okay.
So do you find that usually people, want a first bigger home? When they come to your real estate agents,
Hmm.
do they come with, wrong expectations, kind of? I read somewhere that, millennials overestimate their buying power. Do you
I
see that?
definitely, yes.
And then
I
maybe to add maybe to the question, and then if this is the case, is there then an opportunity for buying smaller homes, which might,
Yes, definitely. So that happens a lot. And that's why I think it really comes down to the real estate agent. So a lot of people, we get those that want to buy their first place in Boston. And when they realize that they're going to need $1 million to qualify for $1 million to buy a place, they're like, wow, I definitely can't afford it. But then we just talk about what the other options are. So there are low and moderate income properties throughout Boston that people can buy. And then also we talk about how they can just move further they get outside the city. So I have offices all the way from Boston to Cape Cod, all the way to Western Massachusetts. And what's interesting, Western Massachusetts, which is on the Connecticut border, the average price out there is like $160,000. You also have roughly 45 minutes from Boston, New Hampshire, and you can get a lot for your dollar in New Hampshire. So the thing about it is that, I mean, if you're willing to drive an hour outside the city, and many people are, because they're not even working in the city, which makes it even easier. But if you're willing to drive an hour outside the city, you could get to an area where the average price for a 1,000 square foot home is like 180,000, whereas a 2,000 square foot property in Boston would be over $1 million.
yep. Thanks. So I'm moving a little quicker there.
Mm-hmm.
So retail store, I see a lot, so we hear the retail stores are getting, sort of closed, and because, Amazon and all those companies, that are now providing, products online. So retail stores in some areas are not doing that well, and I see them in Somerville, for instance, where they're getting flipped to condos. Is that something you
Yes.
see also? Is that a good, maybe thing to think about as a buyer, to take and we had the same in the Industrial Revolution, right, where factories were turned then into
Mm-hmm.
condos. Are we then in a new trend where now it's like retail stores and malls maybe going to be turned, one day to apartment buildings? Is that something you see as well, or?
Definitely. I would say that's happening a lot with developers going in and turning, like you said, retail spaces into residential developments. I'd also say on a smaller, seeing investors who do one deal a year. So you could be somebody that does not own a great deal of real estate, who buys family property and turns it into condos. So it's just a great way to get even more value for the same piece of real estate. You could buy it and then you have to have a legal team that does it, but you could divide it up into 3 pieces of real estate from that one purchase and then sell different condos in the same building.
And do you guys, a buyer do this, an investor do this?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
So what's the process of house flipping? So you did this a lot in your early career.
Mm-hmm.
What it's about, and is it open to everyone? Is it a big investment in time? Is it, worth it? What's your thoughts on this?
Yes. So in order to flip real estate, first of all, you're going to need some money up front. So to flip real estate, you need the down payment to purchase the property as well as the money to repair and fix it. So first of all, I'd say talk to a mortgage person because they're going to tell you how much money you need. There are some really cool programs out there that will help finance some modeling or the repairs that you're going to do. But still, you're typically going to need like a 20% down payment to buy an investment property that you're going to flip. I need 20% down. You can probably find a mortgage that will roll in the cost of repairs for the property, and then you can resell. I'll also say that a lot of the private lenders we have very tailored programs. So for example, I have a private lender, a lot, who basically he is a very wealthy individual who partners with people who want to flip real and basically creates like a 50-50 partnership, so that the person, typically what I see is these are newer investors doing their first or second flip. They're going to make less because now they have a 50-50 partner in it. But now they have, that 50-50 partner is well capitalized, like they have the money to put the down payment, etc. So there are cool programs like that. One or two transactions with a program like that, where somebody might have an investor partner, they start to like a nest egg of money so that they can just do their own flips.
Great, thank you. So next question here. So multifamily home. So people think that buying a multifamily home and renting the extra unit is an easy way for passive income. Is that true, or is there more to it?
There's definitely more to it. It is a great way for to create passive income. I own multifamilies. What I'll say is there's definitely ongoing revenue. Having multifamily properties is great just to have that ongoing revenue. Or if you have a mortgage on the property, which I typically have mortgages on all my properties, your return might not be massive. So you might get $1,000 a month, but you might be paying $1,700 a month just for your mortgage. So it's not a massive amount of income coming. The reason I do it is because I look at it that over time that mortgage will get paid down, and eventually I'll have a piece of property that has no mortgage, $2,000, or maybe by that time $3,000 a month coming in on it. So plus you get like tax write-offs and stuff like that. So still taxes, multifamily properties are great. The other piece I would say though is really do your homework, because for example, Massachusetts is a tenant-friendly state, meaning if you have a tenant that stops paying you, it takes a really long time to get them out of the property. You have a whole set of procedures you have to go through in order to abide by the law. So, and oftentimes the court rules in favor, not in favor of the landlord. So it's just something to keep in mind for anybody that's considering having rental properties.
Great, thank you. So Real Estate Investment Trust, REIT. So,
Yes.
most people do not know much about this. Most people invest in 401ks and the stock market businesses. But what's your thoughts on REITs? Do you have any insights for?
I think real estate investment trusts are great. I am not a member of one right now. Basically, you can do research. There are a number of them throughout Massachusetts and specifically Boston. But basically, all it is you're buying a share of a company that invests in, basically. So typically, they're all usually they focus on one particular type of real estate. So you might have a real estate investment trust that invests in apartment buildings, or a real estate investment trust that invests in storage property. It's very much like investing in the stock market in that you don't have a lot of control. You're just buying an interest in. I compare it to having at one time invested in real estate trust, which I no longer have any ownership in a real estate investment trust. It's very much stock. So you get regular statements about how much your interest has accumulated, things like that. The downside to it is zero control. Like other people are selecting the properties and dealing with everything. But that's a good thing too. Like you're not dealing with tenants and repairs and units and things like that. Somebody else is dealing with all of it.
Great. And then Buying new or buying old? What's your thoughts on this? Buying a new house or a new condo, or buying an old one, secondhand?
It depends. The upside to buying something old is, I always say, like, if you can find the worst house in the best neighborhood, then you're buying something with any. But repairing a house is not for everybody. It's stressful, it's time consuming, and it can be expensive to hire the right con do the work. Buying new construction comes with a whole other set of potential issues. I always say when it comes to new construction, you have to be super careful and make sure you're working with a real estate agent who educates you on what to look for, because for buying a new house, they'll give you an allowance for a new kitchen. So they'll say you can go pick out which kitchen you want, but here's your allowance of $15. Or your allowance for bathroom fixtures is $3,000. What most people realize, because oftentimes it's their first new construction house they're buying, is they don't realize that the or the kitchen or the bathroom fixtures that they can get for the amount the allowances for, like, they don't end anywhere close to what they thought they could have gotten. So it really comes down to, like, doing the research in advance. So for example, going and touring a house that's brand new and you know what kind of kitchen you're going to want, and find out what the pricing is going to be on it. Because the biggest I hear from buyers of new houses is that they bought a house, let's just say they're buying a brand new house for $700,000. And the beginning of the process, they think that's the real price that they're going to be paying. But by the end, they realize that with the upgrades they wanted, allowances that were given, and them going over budget on allowance, they might end up paying $800,000 when all is said and done. So it's down to, like, working with a real estate agent who understands what the expectation is from the buyer from the beginning, and making sure they understand that based on their expectations, what the real price of the house will be at the end.
Thanks. Is there any tax benefit versus old?
It's the same, new construction versus an old property. The good new construction is there's some warranties that come automatically. So for example, if you're buying a new house, and I don't know how long the warranties are, but like for automatically the state requires that the builder warranty the roof for a certain number of years. So a brand new house comes with some additional warranties you don't get with the old house.
Great. And so what's your thoughts on the Silicon Valley real estate market, if you have any? The Silicon Valley, or San Francisco, the rent in San Francisco is like super high right now. And what's your thoughts on this? Any particular thoughts?
I mean, I think that's not, and I think we see that a little bit in Boston. It is not unusual that when you have a flourishing and thriving economy, that it drives rent. So, and we definitely see it in Boston. I mean, our rents are some of the highest in the country, and prices in the direct Boston vicinity. But the upside to that is when a market crashes, because it does historically every 7 to 10 years, the market goes down. But what we've experienced, because we live in a city that has lots of life science businesses, we have hospitals, great schools, all in one condensed area. The good thing is that when the market fluctuates, it's not as bad for us as other places like Las Vegas and Arizona, where you don't have that. So the downside is we pay for it now, but the upside is that when a market crashes, and they always do, that for us, we don't feel the effects as badly as other cities and states across the country.
Great. Any final words to audiences, millennials, in terms of next steps for them to be able to build their wealth, build their lives, and think about real estate, and what would you recommend them to do next? And any final words? This is all your time now.
Yeah, so I'd say, first of all, visit our website, Laer, Laer, realty.com. If anything, even if you're not looking to buy right now, I think that laerrealty.com is information about the local communities. Just on our blog, we're constantly writing about the communities that we do business in. You'll also find on there, you can search for real estate. So why not just start perusing and seeing what's out there in your areas? Also, you'll find a whole section of consumers, which we add to daily. So a lot of the questions you asked today, like why buy new construction and what should I look for? Or how would I win a bidding war? Or should I buy new? Or should I co-sign on my kid's loan? We answer those in a series of brochures that are available on laerrealty.com. Following us on our website, we're going to be launching a book that's coming out in October of 2017 called Steps to Hiring a Lion, and it's a consumer's guide to choosing an exceptional real estate agent. And basically, consumers that go to our website to download a free copy of the book as well. The book will be available on Amazon, but it's basically breaks down what it can look for when choosing a real estate agent, because your entire buying or selling experience is going to come down to you having a very strong team. And that's okay.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. That was a quite long interview, so I'm really super thankful to you. And I will post it, and well, I'll see you next time also for whatever comes our way next. So thanks a lot.